I'm with Emily Anthus, the author of Frankenstein's Cat, a new look at the frontiers of biology and the way that we're messing with the natural world. And maybe messing is judgmental, but it's really interesting how far along we've gotten in being able to alter the circumstances of the animals that we live with in the world. And just before this interview, I checked with Genesis because I wasn't sure that I had remembered the verse correctly, but mankind is told to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And I'm wondering if that idea, that order from a creator, is sort of soaked into our pores, that we assume that human beings can do whatever they want to animals ultimately.
I think there is some of that, and I think most people would agree that there are certain circumstances in which animal use is justified, for instance, in certain kinds of medical research that could yield life-saving cures. But I also think we have a responsibility to be good stewards and to do things that are good for the planet as a whole and animals as a whole. And I don't think being a good steward is necessarily non-interference. There may be cases in which we have a moral obligation to use our new tools to intervene, to save animal lives, to prop up ecosystems.
Do we have to do a cost-benefit analysis that also takes into account the sacrifices that animals are making, demanded by human beings?
Absolutely, and I think that's an important part of the cost-benefit analysis is what does it cost the animals that are being used in the experiment, as well as, in some cases, wild animals, or how might these adjustments we're making to the natural world affect entire ecosystems?
You know, you write about trying to reintroduce species into the wild, and in many cases, those species aren't there anymore because humankind has destroyed their habitat. We've altered their world, and now we're scratching our heads trying to figure out how to inject them back into it. Are there any successful cases?
There are some successful animal reintroductions. The gray wolves in Yellowstone has been a huge success, but that's a big concern and something ecologists talk a lot about is if you're going to reintroduce the animals, but whatever it was that caused them to disappear in the first place, if that problem is still there, then the same thing's going to happen to them. So if we're destroying habitats or polluting habitats, we need to solve those problems before we start putting the animals back.
Is there almost a Potemkin village flavor to some of these reintroductions? Are they really the animals that were taken out of nature if we've cloned them when they're on the edge of extinction, if we've found a way to recreate them in zoos and labs and menageries before bringing them back into the natural world?
That's a philosophical question some ecologists are having. I mean, so far, no clones have been reintroduced to the wild. These are more conventionally bred animals. But, you know, is a clone really going to be the same animal, the same population that has disappeared? And more importantly, can these animals that are born and created in laboratories, will they have what it takes to survive in the wild? These are debates that ecologists and conservationists have a lot.
You know, we've taken a bird like the turkey, for instance, and bred it to a point where its breast is so big it can hardly walk. And yet we're not debating about turkeys, and we're not debating about chickens. We're not debating about many of the animals that we've already taken so far from their natural state that they don't even resemble themselves anymore. Do we really need like a worldwide conversation, now that there's 7 billion plus of us, a worldwide conversation on how we're going to treat our fellow species on the planet?
Absolutely, and I talk about how genetic engineering is just part of a spectrum that comes from selective breeding, and the questions we're asking about animal welfare with genetic engineering, we should also be asking about selective breeding. Just because we've been doing it for decades or centuries or millennia doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay and that we should keep doing it. So I hope that this book sparks some of that conversation about our relationship with animals as a whole, not just as mediated through technology.
Frankenstein's Cat. Emily Anthus, thanks a lot.
Thank you.